clerk will read out the names.
It's another wonderful Wednesday as usual. I'm delighted to be here bringing you Parliament and Governance here on Independent Television. We're in Benin City, Nigeria. I am Uyi Agumofwegwe. In the last few years, particularly between 2016 and now, I've taken out time to speak with people, politicians, economists, other analysts from other spheres of life to look at the debt profile of this country. Many of them have attributed it to, in some cases, irresponsible style of leadership or governance, if you like. Others have said it's because we really don't care. We just continue to stack up debts for generations unborn. And then you have those who are saying there's some political undertone. In fact, yes, they are saying there's a theory that every time we borrow, there are people, at least a handful of persons, who do benefits from this borrowing that we do. But recall, as I always say, we had been told in 2018 that Nigeria, for the foreseeable future, would borrow. That was what former Minister of Finance, Kemi Adeosun, had told us back in the day, given the reality that we were dealing with at that time, part of which is still pretty much the case today. But there's another angle to this conversation we want to look at on the program this week, which is the loans that particularly come from the Chinese government, especially those that are supposedly or would be supposedly plunged into the railway projects in this country. First, let's put on record that the Minister of Transportation, Right Honorable Rotimi Chibuike-Amechi, has always made a case for Nigeria to see the need to not only appreciate these loans, but pursue, to its logical conclusion, securing these loans so we can, as it were, strengthen our railway system in this country, particularly again when you look at its relevance to development in this country. But in the last couple of days, members of the House of Representatives, as a matter of fact, the National Assembly, has essentially been taking a second, much deeper look at, one, the circumstances that have warranted borrowing so much from the Chinese, the things we have accomplished with these loans vis-a-vis the amount we've collected so far. That was the basis on which they had invited the Minister of Transportation to come explain certain things about these loans. In the end, what he said was, look, we may be uncomfortable with the volume of loans we've collected, but Nigeria must continue to collect these loans because, one, we're already in the middle of many of these loans being awarded, and then we need these loans going forward to make a lot of things happen as far as railway infrastructure is concerned. And he says, even if we decide to say we are not collecting or accepting loans from the Chinese authorities anymore, we have to find a way to, create alternatives as far as all of these issues of development are concerned. On that note, he was given on the 17th of this month, August, to come back and explain details as far as the dynamics around these loans are concerned. Do we have misalignment of priorities going by all of the things we've seen, the things we've heard, both from the minister himself and from the committee that's looking into these loans? Or is it a matter of maybe members of the public and even politicians in Abuja, for example, not understanding how this whole thing works? What exactly is it? That's the conversation on the show this week. We're back shortly. Stay with us.
Whether we get it from China or not is still material. The most important thing is that we must save and protect our people as regard agreement, because most of the agreement that have been signed, the National Assembly have no knowledge. Even details of the information, details embedded in that agreement is not forwarded to you when they are demanding counterpart funding. Details of those information are not forwarded to you. You don't have even the detail clause by clause, which you ought to do.
My guest on the program today, for this week generally, he's an economist and a politician. He understands the bulk of these issues and he's very interested in talking about them. Honorable Fred Uigwe, thank you for joining me on the program.
I thank you, Uigi, for having me, and good afternoon to you, viewers.
I want us to begin with not just the debt burden of Nigeria, because that will appear to stretch the time beyond what we planned for this discussion. But let's specifically look at why railway.
However, that is important.
Of course, we're going to get at the point, even though it's not the focal, it's not the crust, I mean the thrust of the discussion,
Okay.
Basically. But I want us to look at essentially the visibility of railway right now. It appears it's apparently on the front burner, even though we know there are other several critical sectors as well. Why is railway gulping so much? And Nigerians are saying we can't create a balance between what we have borrowed so far from the Chinese government in particular and what we have accomplished in that sector.
Well, it's such a critical sector that it's not something we can run away from.
All right.
Because it takes care of transportation. You know, a lot of people now, given the advancing technology, go on internet to make purchases.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless of what you buy and from where you buy, those things have to be physically transported.
Across countries, across
Across
continents.
countries, across continents, across markets. You know, from market to market. So what we're looking at, like all forms of transportation, are designed to take care of only two things: carry passengers or convey goods. Okay, and the railway is perhaps the cheapest way to transport goods, okay? And it's also the most resilient. There's no developed nation that is not highly dependent on rail freight to transport their goods. Like a lot of heavy and bulk products or goods, gravels and stuff like that. You can't hope to continue transporting those things by trucks. If you do, you will stress the roads, you will damage the roads. We know what trucks do to our roads, you know, especially when they are overloaded or when they carry heavy loads and all of that. They stress the roads very quickly and destroy them. And then we have to come back and spend humongous amounts of money trying to fix these roads. But when you now introduce the element of rail transportation into the mix, then you begin to spend less on the roads. Okay? That is domestically. Of course, you have other options. You can through sea, that's by waterways,
All right.
transport your goods, or by air transport your goods, depending on the urgency and depending on the capacities. So the rail transportation model is actually very, very critical to any nation's development.
We've been doing a lot of borrowing. Yes, exactly.
Now we are having to borrow. So transportation facilities, or not, infrastructure. For this is an infrastructure, are germane to the dynamics of mass production and quick production and the growth of a nation's GDP. Okay, but the calculations is not something that one can be able to broach,
Okay.
unless you have the figures with you. And if we have competent hands, we should be assured that they have crunched the figures. Okay? Because for one thing, when the public invests in an infrastructure, for example, or on any project, it usually has a dual element focus. It is as a social service and at the same time an economic service. So how much of the investment is of social benefits and how much of the investment is of economic benefits? The private sector conduct all their calculations based on economic benefits.
Right.
But that is not the same with the government. So there has to be an attempt to strike a balance. Okay? But the balance should never be such that the social benefit far outweighs the economic benefits. Otherwise, the economy begins to slide. You want the economic benefit to always be more so that you can use the difference to service your social needs.
Right.
So in this case, that is why when there seems to be a rammed up emphasis on railway lines development or railway technology development, my thing is not enough emphasis is given to the transportation of goods. It's more like we are focusing our railway development more on the transportation of persons.
Passengers.
Passengers, right. So,
And that brings minimal economic value, doesn't it?
yes, it does. Because now, most serious businesses are conducted electronically. Okay? So you don't physically need to be there. So when people have to go to their source of a business or go for their transactions, then if it's not an economic transaction, then you're already shortchanging your investment.
There's something I want us to quickly look at, especially given the fact that we have limited time.
Yes.
There are those who express the fear genuinely that the Chinese may be taking over our economy gradually because they say they've done it in a few other countries.
That's correct.
Especially in African countries.
Right.
Are we on that path?
Of course. Even like the Bible says, okay, you are a servant of whom you borrow from. Okay? So the more you borrow from the Chinese or from any lender, the more the lender has leverage
Over you.
To dictate your economic direction.
Right.
And there's always that risk. What has been in the news lately are problems with the terms, the terms of agreement
Yes.
signed with the Chinese. Okay. If they are properly designed, structured,
Negotiated.
negotiated, no, yes, and structured,
Yes.
they will be to protect the investor. The investor needs to be protected. However, there will be in terms of an opportunity to take over some of those infrastructure that you have developed with their investment
Right.
on a concession basis.
Okay.
Okay? If it is on such basis, then there's nothing wrong with it. Okay? But if it's on the basis of using it as an unconscionable opportunity to overreach into the local economy, then you need to watch that, because you do not want that overbearing and controlling interest by foreign nations or foreign organizations. We have found ourselves in such positions in times past, okay, with IMF loans and all of that, where they basically have to dictate what we do with our economy, what values we place on our currency.
Exchange rates regime.
Exactly. So we don't want to go there anymore. I believe the time has come for African nations to begin to look inward, to be able to satisfy some of their even investment needs. For most nations, Nigeria not excluded, the debt burden of nations usually are locally born.
Okay.
Okay, like the United States, I think it is about 70%. The United States is the most indebted nation in the world.
On earth.
Okay, but 70% of that debt is by Americans, bonds sold to Americans. So what they owe foreign
Their
nations or
creditors.
foreign entities, okay, foreign nations, foreign entities, it's just about 30%. Not something that they cannot actually defray.
Yeah. If push
that
comes to
needs-
shove.
Push comes to shove. There's something else that is critical to borrowing. You want to be able to borrow not to the point that you are overstretched. Because when you are overstretched, your credit rating begins to
plummet.
to plummet.
Yes.
And when that happens, that means the interest rate at which you borrow will increase. So you want to keep your interest rate at which you borrow
Yes.
at a competitive rate with other nations. If other nations are borrowing at, say, 2% interest rate, you do not want to exceed that by too much, because by every fraction you exceed that, you also diminish your competitive ability,
Right.
because it's going to reflect, whether you like it or not, regardless of how infinitesimal it might seem, it's going to reflect on the final cost of production. And when that reflects on the final cost of production, whether it's by government or by the private sector, because everything devolves down to the private sector.
Right.
Okay, that cost is very germane, very key to the ability to compete in the global markets.
We're going to take a break very soon, but I want us to look at something else. The committee of the National Assembly is now very interested in this Chinese loan issue.
Right.
So they're saying they are, which you
And
already
that,
did
and,
allusion
that,
to.
and that is a very good development.
Exactly. That there are clauses or there are terms in the
Yes,
agreements
yes.
that they are not comfortable with.
Right.
One of the many issues that people are deducing from that is that such terms with which these legislators feel uncomfortable are also not in the overall interest of Nigerians
Right.
and, of course, the government. Is there a way we can reverse things like this, basically?
Well, absolutely.
Is there a clause? Is there usually a clause that allows for review,
Exactly.
reversal where possible?
Those are usually within the payment clauses.
Okay.
Okay. If your economy, for example, if we're talking about a private company, if the profitability of a private company were to improve,
Right.
okay, and it sees that its debt burden is kind of high. So in this case, we are talking about the nation. You see that your debt burden is high to the point that it is not allowing you carry out a lot of the project work.
Other crucial projects.
Yes, the project works. Okay, so what you do is you quickly pay off the debt.
Okay.
So the more of the debt you quickly pay off, the better your credit position to take other loans. And in paying off the debt, because your economy has improved, for example,
Yeah.
you will probably have an opportunity to now borrow at a lower rate to pay off interest to pay off those borrowed sums, or
Okay.
at which you borrowed at higher rates. And that is one thing for which I must commend the past finance minister, Adeosun. Okay, she was doing a lot of that. She was having to refinance her debt. It's called refinancing
Right.
strategies of settling debts. You know, that's what she was doing, and she was beginning to reposition our debt position as a nation, so that we can be able to borrow at more competitive rates and not having to spend too much of our resources on debt servicing. Because the more you spend on debt servicing, the less you have on capital projects.
I want us to take a break quickly at this point, everyone. We're back shortly. Honorable Fred Uigwe is still here to help us straighten out some of these issues, especially as they affect the discussion on the program this week. Stay with us.
I've told the House of Reps, I told them two things. First is, I just got to know that there's a clause in the agreement. It's simple. China will give you, like, the loan to construct the rail from Ibadan to Kano is $5.3 billion. The reason why you're ceding your sovereignty, not that you're ceding your sovereignty, you can't take away the sovereignty of Nigeria. The implication is that if at the end of the day you don't pay us back our money, whatever we need to take from you, we will take without you telling me about sovereignty. But most times what the Chinese do is that they go after the same asset that they have constructed to be able to recover their money. So what's wrong with that?
It's good to know you're still there with us. I just want to bring something else into focus here.
Okay.
The minister said categorically, if the members of the National Assembly, especially members of the committee looking into these Chinese loans, feel Nigeria ought not to have even been involved in securing these loans in the first instance, they should profile alternatives. What's the reaction to that?
That is why they are elected anyway, to be able to perform their oversight functions,
Right.
which is what they are doing. And Nigerians should be angered, let me say that, if the representatives they have elected to perform oversight functions are not doing what they were elected to do. So they are supposed to do that. Okay? In the process of legislation anyway, let us not always forget that some of those legislators are professionals in their rights.
Yes.
And some of them, and the way some of, I want to think even too, that the legislative arm seems to have a better history of placing professionals in their areas of supervision,
Okay.
of professionals qualified for specific
So round
areas.
pegs and round holes.
Yes, they have a better history of that than the executive branch seems to have, especially this particular
Administration.
executive administration. So you cannot take it away from them what they are capable of doing. So in their usual deliberations, okay, they are able to profile alternatives. There is nobody that is an island of wisdom. Wisdom is not reposed in any one single person. In the multitude of counsel, there is wisdom, the Bible tells us. And that is so very true in business or in administration. When you bounce ideas, when you brainstorm with other people, then solutions come forth. Okay? It is important too that if they are going to appropriate funds for the execution of any project or for the running of the government, it is important that they understand exactly for what they are appropriating those funds. And they have to be able to, put these borrowed sums in context with other investments and
Right.
other appropriations that they have to make. So it is well within their rights to do that.
To do that.
But I also believe that it is the obligation and responsibility of the economic managers, okay? That's the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank of Nigeria, okay, of the nation's economic managers,
Right.
to present to the National Assembly those statements and reasons why they have engaged in such borrowing and why they did that and for what they did that. Okay? It's not sufficient to say, okay, we borrowed this amount of money for this, or we plan to borrow this for this. You should also present, because like I have just mentioned, many of them are professionals
In their own rights, across different fields.
Exactly, across different fields. So you have to also present the cost-benefit analysis, which is what I was alluding to earlier. There are cost-benefit analysis that you have to conduct. In the case of nations, of course, it's not as hard and dry as it is with private investments. So you have to be able to show to the legislators that for social needs and for social stability and balance, this is what we have done. But we understand that we cannot overreach.
Right.
We cannot do too much of that, or else the economy itself would suffer.
Finally, there's something I must ask you. This is a probe of sorts going on.
Okay.
Oversight function, as we already agreed here. But there are also Nigerians who have misgiven
Yes.
about this whole process, because they say we have a history of several similar probes that didn't see the light of day. I mean, they produced little or no results ultimately. What makes this difference overall?
No, you also have to consider that on the backdrop of what has happened to other African nations. Okay, Nigeria knows that.
So we are taking a cue from that.
We are taking a cue from that. That is not a good position to be in.
Right.
We don't want to be in a position again where you are falling from fry pan to fire. Okay, from the fire pan to fire. We were in such positions with the clubs, the Paris club, the London club, and all the financial
until we got some relief.
Until we got some relief. And now it's like we are entangling ourselves all over again, now with the Asian blocs. And the Asian bloc seems to play even harder and meaner
than the West.
Than the West. But so the borrower is always at the mercy of the lender.
So what you're saying is, overall, we must take a cue from what has happened to a few other African countries.
So that is the fear of Nigerians.
Okay. And that fear is legitimate.
It's very, very legitimate.
Okay, incidentally, it's an ongoing conversation. The Honorable Minister of Transportation will present himself to the Committee of the National Assembly on the 17th of this month. Give or take, that's just a matter of, less than 2 weeks away. So we'll keep the conversation going, both here on our television and of course on our social media platforms. Thank you so much, Honorable Fred Uigwe.
Thank you for having me.
For being a part of the program. I'm Uyi Agbomofoegbe. This is where we draw the curtains on the program this week. Our coverage here on ITV continues. Enjoy the rest of your evening.